Masechet Shevuot Daf Mem Vav. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Shelachu le mibe Rav lishmuel. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba reports that a question was sent from the school of Rav to Shmuel. They wanted to know Shmuel's opinion. And they asked him, Yilamedenu Rabenu, Uman omer shetaim kasasta li, vehala omer lo kasasta lecha ela achat. Mi nishpa. If you have a craftsman is important because they generally get paid not by the hour, not for their time, but rather for the entire job, a fixed amount. That's called katzatz. So let's, for example, say a tailor. You bring something to the tailor. He doesn't charge you by the hour. He says to fix this will be $50. Doesn't matter if it takes him 5 minutes or if it takes him 5 hours. It's going to be $50. Or let's say in this example, it says 2 coins. So the craftsman, the tailor said, we decided that this is going to cost 2 coins, but the customer or owner of the item, you could call it owner or customer, says, no, we agreed on 1 coin. And now they're fighting about how much he's going to pay. So this is a modeh b'miksat case because the customer is agreeing that he owes something. He's not saying, I don't know who you are, I never gave you anything to fix. He's agreeing that, yes, I owe you something, I owe you 1 coin, but he's denying the other coin. So now, who has the responsibility to make a vow? Is it the craftsman who makes a vow and collects, or is it the customer who makes a vow and does not pay? That was the question. And here's Shmuel's answer. Amar lehen, bezo yishaba bal habayit v'yafsid uman, kesisa v'aday mitkar dechire inashe. He says, in this case, for sure, the owner, the customer, should make a vow and therefore not have to pay. And since he doesn't have to pay, the craftsman will lose out. Why is that the case? Because when it comes to a fixed wage, certainly everybody remembers, including the owner, that's the employer, is going to remember. So this case is contrasted with the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, if you remember, was a case of a day laborer who takes a salary. Here's the Mishnah that talks about D'Rabbanan vows, and it says one of them is a sachir, that's a worker who says, can you pay me? And the owner says, I already paid you. And the worker says, no, I didn't get anything. So in that case, we say the worker can make a vow and collect. Okay, there the worker says the worker collects. And the reasoning that we explained above in the Gemara is because the worker will remember better than the employer. The employer is busy with a lot of things, and during the day or towards the end of the day, there's a lot of people getting paid, a lot going on, so he's not concentrating. He may not remember who he paid and who he didn't. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to make him make a vow, but the worker, after putting in 10-hour day of labor, he's going to for sure remember whether he got paid or not. And that's why, in this case, the worker is the one that is nishba ve'notel. Okay, that makes sense. But in the case of a fixed amount, there the owner is going to remember because that's talking about a customer. He's the employer, but he just has 1 piece of clothing or 1 pot to bring to the blacksmith, and so he will remember, and therefore there's no need to switch it. In other words, the basic law is, as we say over here, that that it's the owner that should make the vow and not have to pay. But in the case of a salaried worker, because the owner is not going to remember, so therefore we say that the worker can make a vow and get paid. So that's the distinction we have so far, according to Shemuel. I'd like to bring you a chart right now that's going to summarize the conclusion of this sugya. It's a relatively long sugya, and the questions and answers are going to somewhat go in circles back and forth, but it's going to end up in a definite place that is kind of predictable all along. So to clarify, it's worth looking at the conclusion of what we're going to see. So there's actually 4 types of cases. One distinction is a day labor versus a fixed cost. We just mentioned that. Now, within that, there's also a difference between a full denial and a partial denial in both cases. If you remember back in the Mishnah, I already talked about that, because in the case of a salaried worker, Rabbi Yehuda disagreed and said, no, ad shetesham miksat hoda'ah. I would agree that the worker can make a vow and collect only if the employer had partially agreed, if there's a modeh b'miksat. How so? If the worker says, you owe me 50 dinar that for working, and the boss says, hit kabalta dinar zahav, I paid you half. Only in that case does the worker take an oath and will be paid the whole sum. Otherwise, not so. So that's summarized here, where if your day laborer has a partial denial, in that case, actually everybody agrees that the worker vows and collects. But the machloket is when a day laborer case, and there's a full denial. The owner says, I don't owe you anything. In that case, the rabbis say, it doesn't matter. The rabbis make no distinction between full denial and partial denial. In that case, also the worker vows and collects. But Rabbi Yehuda disagrees in that case and says, if there's a full denial, then the owner can make a vow and not pay. Okay, so that we already saw in the Mishnah, and we also saw one of the cases of fixed cost. What we're going to show at the end is that there is a consistency of the rabbis and a consistency of the Rabbi Yehuda, but they make distinctions across different lines altogether. So let's focus on the rabbis first. The rabbis make a distinction between day labor and fixed cost. And they don't make no distinction between full denial and partial denial. You can see that here. According to the rabbis, if a person's a day laborer, then the worker vows and collects. The worker vows and collects. So it doesn't matter, full or partial denial, always the worker vows and collects. But if it's a fixed cost item, like the tailor, then according to the rabbis, the owner vows and does not pay. Here also, right, the owner or customer in that case makes a vow and does not pay. And distinction is what we just mentioned according to Shemuel, which is that, and the fixed cost is actually the basic law, which is there's a dispute for how much should he get paid or not. So the basic law is that the owner, customer, should make a vow and he will not have to pay. So that's the basic law. But the rabbis say, you know what? We want to protect workers when they are a day laborer, because in those cases, the owner, the boss, doesn't remember at the end of the day exactly who's paid and who's not paid. So therefore, in that case, we make it a protection to the worker, and we say, you know what, worker? You really know. We trust you better. You take a vow that you didn't get paid, and then you collect. All or partial, that doesn't matter. But when it comes to an owner of a piece of clothing, that person will remember, so there's no reason to switch it to the worker making the vow. That's all the logic of the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda says, I make no distinction between day labor and fixed cost. I don't care what kind of worker it is. I make a distinction between full denial and partial denial. So if you look at Rabbi Yehuda, he's consistent. If there's a full denial, Rabbi Yehuda says the owner vows and does not pay. Here also, the owner or customer vows and does not pay. But if it's a partial denial, then Rabbi Yehuda also is consistent, and he says when there's a partial denial, the worker vows and collects. Here also, when there's a partial denial, the worker vows and collects. The Gemara at the end will explain Rabbi Yehuda's logic for making a distinction between full denial and partial denial. It has to do with the fact that partial denial is a deoraita vow, because that's modeh b'miksat. Whereas a full denial, according to Torah, there's no vow for that. That's a rabbinic law. So he's making a distinction between deoraita and the rabbanan, and he says in the deoraita we go ahead and protect the workers, and we switch it to protect the workers because it's a deoraita. But in the rabbanan, it's sufficient that the rabbis made a takana at all. We don't have to add another takana to a takana that the rabbis already made. Okay, so far we saw the opinion of Shemuel, that when you have a modeh b'miksat case and it's a kitzitza, it's a fixed amount, then the owner of the item can make a vow and he will not pay. Now we ask about a challenge against Shemuel. Ini taner abba bar Shemuel kasas hamosim echavero alav hareaya. We have a baraita that we learned on a previous daf, and the previous daf had the full baraita, and it was the same case that we just mentioned. It was a case of katzatz, and there was a partial denial, and there it said he who wants to extract money has to bring the proof. In that case, it's the tailor that says we decided to, so you owe me too. If he wants to collect, then he has to bring a proof. If he doesn't have a proof, then the owner of the item does not have to pay and does not have to make a vow either. So Shemuel, why do you say that the owner has to make a vow? According to the Baraita, the owner does not have to make a vow and still does not pay. That's what we ask. If the craftsman does not bring a proof, then his claim goes away without any need for a vow by anyone. Why? According to you, Shemuel, let the owner make a vow and the craftsman will lose out, as Shemuel just said. Don't get confused by this Shemuel. This is Rabbah bar Shemuel, a different person, and he is only quoting a baraita. So all this is a baraita. In the end, you can actually remember it better because of the Shemuel, because we're going to reconcile right now the Shemuel, the Amorah, with this baraita that's quoted from the son of Shemuel. So actually, they will end up going together. But right now, we have a question, and the answer is Amar Rav Nachman listadin katane, or maybe re'aya v'yitol, or yishabah bal habayit v'yafsid uman. In fact, the baraita and the statement of Shemuel are two sides of the same coin. And what it means is as follows. The owner can the craftsman can either bring proof and take it. That's what the baraita is saying. That's the craftsman. If he has proof, then he can go and take it. But if not, the homeowner, the owner of the item, can make a vow and not pay. So it's actually both. It's one or the other. If the homeowner has nothing, doesn't want to make a vow, okay, of course, if you're supposed to make a vow, and you don't want to make a vow, then you'll have to pay. But as long as the homeowner is willing to make a vow, he can make a vow and not pay. The only thing that can override a vow is proof. If the craftsman has witnesses or a document, well, then that will be stronger than a vow. So really, we can reconcile Shemuel. Indeed, the craftsman will have to bring proof, and the homeowner, he only has to make a vow, and then he will not have to pay. Now another challenge against Shemuel. So far we had baraita number 1. And this is now baraita number 2. Hanoten talito le'uman. Uman omer kasasta li shetayim. V'ala omer lo kasasta lecha ela achat. Someone brings his clothing to the craftsman, to a tailor. And the tailor said, we decided it's going to cost you 2 coins. But the customer says, no, we decided it's going to cost only 1 coin. So same case as before. Kitzitza, and also it's a modeh b'miksat. So now we have a few more possibilities, but we're going to focus on one. If the cloth is still in the hands of the tailor, he's still holding on to it, and he says, hey, you owe me 2, I'm not giving it back to you until you pay me, then the customer is going to have to bring a proof, because and right now the tailor is holding on to the item, and so the customer will have to bring the proof. But netanalo, if he already gave it to him, he delivered it, he already gave it over, and now he's coming to collect. Bizmano nishba v'notel. It depends. If it's at the same time, meaning the same day that he delivered the finished product, then the craftsman can make a vow and collect. This is where the question is going to be from. Here it says the craftsman can just simply make a vow and he will collect the 2 coins. But if it's already the next day or later, well, what is he waiting around for? Why didn't he collect on the same day? So that already weakens his argument, and then the craftsman is the one that has to bring the proof, because he's making the customer pay. On the same day, it's not yet called Motzi Mechavero because I just gave you the item before today, and therefore he can just make a vow and take it. So now let's focus on the question. Bizmano miha nishba v'notel. Okay, all the other cases are incidental. The main thing is, on the same day, the craftsman can make a vow and collect. Amai, yishabab al habayit v'yafsid uman. According to Shemuel, he said the opposite. That's the owner of the item can make a vow and not have to pay the craftsman. So now we have a contradiction between this baraita, we'll call it the second baraita, and the opinion of Shemuel. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Hamaneh Rabbi Yehuda hi damar kol zman sheshevuah nota esel bal habayit sachir nishba v'notel. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says this second baraita is a minority opinion, not Chachamim. The first one is Chachamim. Shemuel is following Chachamim, but the second one is in contradiction, and is the minority opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says anytime there is a Shevuah that naturally would fall on the owner, the rabbis say, you know what? The Sachir, the worker, can take a vow and take it instead. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda wants to protect the rights of workers. Workers unite. He wants to help the workers so that they could make sure to get paid and have protection against customers/employers. And so that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that would be consistent here. This baraita says if he pays on that day, then the tailor can make a vow and collect. Really, you're right. It should be the owner that can make a vow and not pay, but Rabbi Yehuda is pro-workers. Okay, remember that. He's pro-workers. Now, you just quoted Rabbi Yehuda saying this. Where did you see that Rabbi Yehuda said this? Let's see. Hey, Rabbi Yehuda, ilema Rabbi Yehuda de matnitin. Is it Rabbi Yehuda that's mentioned in our Mishnah? Remember, in our Mishnah, it was talking about a salaried worker. So in that case, achmure kamachmir ditnan Rabbi Yehuda omer ad shetehe sham miksat hoda'ah. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda was actually stringent on workers. As it says in the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a worker can only make a vow and collect if the owner agreed to part. He says, I paid you half. Then the worker can make a vow and collect. And everybody agrees in that case when it's a modeh b'miksat. But Rabbi Yehuda disagreed on the first case if it's a complete denial. All right, here's our chart. If it's a complete denial, Rabbi Yehuda says the owner makes a vow and does not pay. What do we see from here? That Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is pro-owner. It's the Rabbanan that are always pro-worker. They pro-workers here. Rabbi Yehuda says pro-owner. So how could it be that Rabbi Yehuda said this? Because Rabbi Yehuda here, in what you quoted, is pro-worker, but Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is pro the employer. So it doesn't make sense, and the Mishnah doesn't say explicitly what Rabbi Yehuda says about a case of Ketzitza. So this can't be a source, and it really doesn't fit well with it. Ela Rabbi Yehuda de Baraita. Actually, Rabbi Yehuda is his opinion in this regarding this case is said explicitly in the following Baraita. The Tanya. Some of it is parallel to our Mishnah. Sachir kol zman shelo avar alav zemano hareze nishba v'notel v'im lav eno nishba v'notel. If you're talking about a salaried worker, then as long as the day is not completed, the worker can make a vow and he can collect. This is Rabbanan. But if not, if he didn't collect that day, then what are you doing waiting around? Then he can no longer, he lost his right to make a vow and collect. That is the opinion of Rabbanan. They say, salaried worker, no matter what, we protect the worker. ואמר רבי יהודה, מתי בזמן שאמר לו תן לי שכרי 50 דינר, שיש בידך והוא אומר התקבלת מהן דינר זהב, או שאמר לו שתיים כססת והלה אומר לא כססתי לך אלא אחת. Rabbi Yehuda says, when is that true that the worker can make a vow and collect? not in a full denial case, only in a partial denial case. For example, if it's a salaried worker, where the worker says, pay me 50 dinar, and the boss says, I already paid you 25, so I only owe you 25 more. That's a modeh b'miksat case. And in that case, yes, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the worker can swear and collect. Or if it's a kitzitza case, a fixed amount, and the tailor says, we decided 2 coins, and the customer says 1 coin. Again, here, Rabbi Yehuda says that the worker can vow and collect. And so we see here explicitly that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is a fixed worker. That's in the case, in modeh b'miksat case. That's the worker that makes the vow and collects, which is exactly what it says in Baraita number 2. So this is good. Right now we can conclude that the second Baraita is, in fact, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Before we ask a question on it, let's finish the Baraita. Aval amar lo sechaticha me'olam, o she'amar lo sechaticha v'natati lecha secharecha, hamosim echavero alav haraya. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the boss says, I never hired you at all. Or he says, I did hire you, but I paid you in full. That's a case of a full denial. And if case of a full denial, then the worker cannot just make a vow and collect. Rather, he would have to bring proof. And a vow is not enough. Okay, so that we see now that Rabbi Yehuda could be the author of that Baraita, right? Here's a problem, that there's a logical inconsistency. There's a paradox here. Matkif larav shisha bered rav idi ela kasas Rabbi Yehuda hi velo Rabbanan. So now you're telling me that the Baraita about the fixed amount, the second Baraita is Rabbi Yehuda and not the opinion of Rabbanan. Does that make sense? Logically, Hashta hechi de machmir Rabbi Yehuda mikile Rabbanan. Hecha de mekil Rabbi Yehuda machmere Rabbanan. Does it make sense that in a case where Rabbi Yehuda is stringent, Rabbanan are lenient? That's talking about a case of a day laborer where Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent on the worker. Now, talking about the worker when we say stringent or not. Rabbi Yehuda is against the worker. He says the owner can make a vow easily and he doesn't have to pay. So does it make sense that in a case where the Rabbi Yehuda is stringent and the rabbis are lenient, meaning they're pro-workers, but then you're going to tell me that in this context of a fixed cost, it's the other way around, where the Rabbi Yehuda is pro-worker, the rabbis prefer the owner and are against the worker? This doesn't make any sense. So now we go back. Ve'ela mai Rabbanan. Now what do you want to say? That Baraita, the second Baraita, you want to say it's Rabbanan? That also doesn't make sense. Ve'ela hadetane Rabba bar Shemuel kasas hamosim echavero alav haraya. We know what the rabbi said. The rabbi said in that very same case, that's Baraita number 1. That you have a modeh b'miksat case where it's a fixed amount, and the rabbi said that you have to hamosim echavero, that would be the craftsman has to bring a proof, meaning the worker cannot simply make a vow. That would not be sufficient. The other side, the customer who can make a vow and not pay. So we know that the rabbis who agree with Baraita number 1 are not consistent with Baraita number 2, so that wouldn't work. Maneh, la Rabbi Yehuda, la Rabbanan. Now we're stuck. The second Baraita can't be Rabbi Yehuda because of the logical inconsistency, and it can't be Rabbanan either because it contradicts the Baraita, the first Baraita, where they say the opposite. Ela amar Rava. And now the moment we've been waiting for. All of this was a setup for Rava, so we can appreciate his understanding of it. And he has a brilliant interpretation. In fact, there is a switcheroo here, but it's understandable if you follow their logic, which is each logic is self-consistent. Rabbi Yehuda sabar bidoraita abadu letakanta lasachir ubidrabanan havai takanta vetakanta letakanta laavdinan. When it comes to a deoraita vow, and that's any vow that is a modeh b'miksat, is a deoraita vow, the rabbis come and say, you know what? We should move this vow to the owner, to the worker, because we want to protect workers' rights. And instead of the owner making a vow and not paying, let's have the worker be able to make a vow and collect. That's true in modeh b'miksat. where it's a doraita law, and the rabbis can come and make a takana. That's how they make a takana. They have the power to do that. But ubidrabanan, the other vows, the vows when there's a full denial, there's no doraita vow there. That's only a dirabanan vow. So just making a vow at all is a dirabanan. The fact that we even make the owner take a vow at all. Really, the owner doesn't have to take a vow. The owner denied everything. From Torah law, he denied everything. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't owe you anything. And he could just walk away. The rabbis say, let's give some protection to the worker by making the owner make a vow first. So that's already a takana that helps the worker somewhat. We don't have to add a takana above the takana and say, no, not only that, no, the owner can't make a vow and not pay, or we're going to make a second takana on the takana and make the worker have a vow and be able to collect. That's already going too far. There's no need to go that far. So that explains the Yehuda. V'Rabbanan sabre b'Rabbanan name abdinan takanta lesachir ukesisa midchar dechir. Rabbanan, however, say that when it comes to a hired worker, there we say that the owner is not going to remember what's going on. And therefore, the rabbis make a takana and switch it to the sachir. And it makes no difference whether it's a deoraita vow, because modev miksat, or the rabbanan vow, where it's a full denial. That doesn't matter. The rabbis say, listen, the boss is distracted. He's not going to remember. Therefore, in all cases of a paid laborer for his time, we're going to allow the laborer to make a vow and collect. That makes sense. But if it's a fixed amount, then that logic is not necessary. There's no need to switch it at all. Because it's a fixed amount, therefore, the owner remembers when you drop something off at the cleaners, at the tailor, you remember exactly how much it's going to be. And since you remember, there's no drabanan need to switch it at all. And again, here, it doesn't matter whether it's doraita or drabanan, whether it's a partial denial or a full denial. We can leave the vow as is, that it's the owner that makes the vow and therefore does not have to pay. And so you see that both sides are completely self-consistent, and we can explain Baraita number 1 is Rabbanan, and Baraita number 2 is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We now move to the next part of the Mishnah that said, Nigzal kesad, hayu me'idin oto shenichnas lebeto lemashkeno vechule. Another one of the Rabbanan vows is a victim of robbery. And the Mishnah gives an example of someone where there are witnesses that this guy entered someone else's house. The guy that entered the house happens to be a lender, and the guy's house is the borrower. And the borrower claims this guy, the lender, barged into my house and took a collateral without permission, which is not allowed. That's basically stealing. And the lender, the guy who went into the house, says, yeah, I did go into the house, but I didn't take anything. And so in that case, the house owner can make a vow that he took this item and he can collect the money. Now we ask, wait, how could he just collect by making a vow? Maybe the lender who came into the house didn't actually take anything. Well, then you ask, well, why did he barge into the house? Easy. He wanted to blow off some steam. He wanted to make a threat, right? And look at this following statement. Mila amar Rav Nachman, Hayman denakit narga bideh, ve'amar ezil ve'ektele ledikla de planya, ve'ishtakach diktil ushdi, la'amrinan dehu katle. Rav Nachman said that if a person takes an axe in his hand and says, I'm going to go and chop down this person's palm tree, and then you go and look, and sure enough, the palm tree is chopped down and lying on the ground, we do not say for sure that person chopped it. He won't have to pay unless there's evidence that someone saw him actually chopping it down. This is circumstantial evidence. Alma avidin ish tegazim vela avid. Hachanameh tegazim vela avid. What would you see from Rav Nachman's statement? That sometimes people exaggerate. They boast. They say, I'm so angry, I'm going to do this and that, and they make threats. But they don't actually go through with it. Okay, oh, but this tree was knocked down. Okay, someone chopped it down. Doesn't mean it's necessarily him. You can't assume just because he's holding an axe and saying, I'm going to chop down the tree, you don't assume that he actually did it. Same thing here, just because this lender barged into someone's house, says, I'm going to take a collateral. I'm going to take this and that. And then he marches out. Doesn't mean he necessarily did it. Maybe he was just making threats. Maybe he was just reminding the person that he has to pay up. But so what? So witnesses saw he went in, but if they didn't see anything, how's that sufficient just for the homeowner to make a vow and have the other guy pay? Not enough. So we modify the case. Ema umishkeno. Say that the witnesses saw him march into the house and also saw him take something. Okay, if they saw him take something, then why don't they testify what he took? Why is there a disagreement where the homeowner says he took this item and the guy says no, I didn't take that item? So what are they disagreeing about? Why not just testify what it was? Rabbi Yochanan explains it's when the claim is about something that usually is carried under one's garments. And so the person carried it under his coat, and the witnesses couldn't see. There was some item there. We don't know what it was. And the homeowner says it was this thing, and the defendant said, no, it was not. So now there's more than just circumstantial evidence that he walked in and made threats. He actually walked out with something, and therefore that's sufficient grounds for the homeowner to make a vow and collect. Amar Yehuda, Ra'u sheitmin kelim tachat kenafa v'yasa. Now, follow up on that case. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the witnesses saw that someone goes into someone else's house and has some items under his garment and he left. Ve'amar, lekuchin hin biyadi eno ne'eman. But the person, the intruder who came and took things, he says, oh, I bought these items. I own them. And that's why I don't have to give them back. And the homeowner says, no, he didn't buy them. They belong to me. So the guy who took them is not believed and he has to pay. But now we're going to have a list of limitations on this law of Rav Yehuda. It's going to be so many limitations that it's going to be hard to figure out when the law actually applies. Limitation number one is this is only true if it's an homeowner that doesn't sell things from his house. So then the guy's walking out and he says, I bought it. Well, that's not very likely. But if it's someone who sells things from their house, I don't know, he makes some stuff and he sells it from his home and someone walked out, so then it's very likely that he in fact bought some items from the guy's house. The guy has garage sales, or he sells antiques in his house. So then it could definitely be that it was sold and he will be believed. And even if it's a person who doesn't usually sell things, we only say that the intruder is not believed if it's something that is not usually hidden. But if it's something that's typically hidden, then we believe him. Because why is he hiding it? If it's something that is not usually hidden, people carry out in the open, so why is he hiding it? Rather, maybe it's something like, I don't know, underwear or something that people don't usually carry around in public out there, so people would tend to hide it. If it's an item that people would tend to hide, then we believe him when he says, I bought it, and I was hiding it because it's a type of thing that's usually hidden. And even something that people don't usually hide, this halacha of eno ne'eman is only true if it's a person that is not generally not so secretive. But if it's someone who's very modest, very secretive, and everything he buys, he's always carrying underneath, even if he buys some food, a cup of coffee, he doesn't have to hold it out in the open. He puts it in a bag, he covers it up. He likes to be very secretive. In that case, since that's his way, then we believe him when he says, oh, this is mine and I bought it. And he says, oh, why are you covering it under your clothes? He always does that. So then he's believed. זה אומר שאולין וזה אומר לקוחין, אבל בגנובין לאו כל כמהנה לחזוקי איניש, בגנבה למחזקינן. And we only say אינו נאמן if the homeowner said, I lent it to him, and he has to pay. He has to give it back to me. This is my hammer. I lent it to him. He has to give it back. And the other guy said, no, I bought it. Then we say the guy who took it is not believed. But if the homeowner says he stole it, then we do not believe the homeowner to make another person into a thief. Most people are not thieves, and so this guy came and he's a thief. That is just a regular person, and you have no proof that it was in fact stolen. He claimed it was bought. So then the homeowner has to bring proof, and it's not sufficient for him to just make a vow, because we're not going to trust someone's word to call someone a thief. If he says he borrowed it, okay, then you're not calling him a bad person. You're just saying he borrowed it and he has to pay back. Then you can make a vow and collect it. Now follow up on that is, one would only be believed if it's an item that is the homeowner would be believed. That is, the thief, the guy who took it out, would not be believed only if it's something that people usually lend or rent out, like a hammer, a lawnmower. These are typical things that people tend to borrow. So then we believe the homeowner if he makes a vow that this was a borrowed item. But if it's something that people generally don't borrow, then we assume that the guy who came in and took it out under his clothing, in fact, bought it, because people don't usually borrow such items. And we know this because Tishlach Rav Huna bar Avin Devarim Hasuin Lashir Laskir V'amad L'kulchin Hen Biyadi Eno Ne'eman. Rav Huna bar Avin sent the following halacha, that things that people generally do lend out or rent out, like a lawnmower, and the other guy says, I bought it, he's not believed. When you bought it, it's more likely that you borrowed this item. But if it's something that people don't tend to borrow, then we'll believe him that he bought it. Ki had Rava apik zuga desarbela v'sifra d'agadata miyatmeh b'dvarim asuyin lashil ulaskir. And there was an actual case like this where Rava acted as a judge, and he extracted fabric scissors and the book of Agadah from orphans. Both these things are things that people tend to borrow, right? You need some scissors, special scissors to cut fabric. You don't have to do it all the time. I went and borrowed my neighbor's scissors. Or Book of Agadah is actually very interesting in its own, because generally oral law was not written down. But that's true mostly for halacha. When it came to Agadah, there the sages were lenient, and we see here that there were in fact books, probably scrolls where they wrote down Agadah. Agadah is a lot longer, then harder to remember, and it's not the essential part of oral law like halacha is. And so halacha, shorter, basic halachot, that cannot write down, but Agadot were allowed to be written down. But Agadah is something you want to borrow. Oh, I'm giving a Devar Torah tomorrow. Hey, can I borrow your book of Agadah? I want to read some stories, some interpretations. So those are things that generally are borrowed, and therefore some guy died, and in part of the property were these items. And since these are things that are likely to be borrowed, there was a claimant and says, those are my scissors. I lent it to his father, to their father, or I lent this book of Agadah, and then he died. Rava says, since these are items that are usually lent out, so we will believe the original owner, and not believe the orphans who would make a claim that no, our father bought it. And so Rava took it even from orphans. Amar Rava, afilu shomer nishba, afilu nishto shel shomer nishba'at. Rava added another law that not only can the homeowner make a vow in these cases and collect, even the watchman. Let's say this homeowner has a watchman in front of the house, and the watchman said, I saw that some individual barge in, took something under his cloak and left. That also doesn't have to be the homeowner that makes the claim. It could be a watchman that makes the claim, or makes the oath rather. Makes the oath that yes, it belongs to my employer, or it could be the wife of the owner of the house that makes the vow, because she's home and she knows what's around, and she can testify that this item, this hammer, was over here, and this guy came in and he took it, and he borrowed it. but he didn't buy it. And so she might know, and therefore she is credible to make an oath. Papa asked, what about a person's hired worker or his harvester who's around and he works for the guy? How about those guys? See, they're not quite as trustworthy as a shomer, because a shomer, that's his job, is to make sure people don't take things. So he's going to be very aware if someone took something and under what conditions. Did he take it with permission? Did he borrow it? Did he buy it? So therefore he and the wife know more what's going on, whereas the worker might just see something, but it's not his main job. And therefore the question is, are they trustworthy to make an oath? And we leave that open-ended. Amar le Rav Yemar le Rav Asher, te'ano bechasa de chaspa mai chazena I inish ta'amid hu o inish temeheman hu temafkede inashe gabe mishtaba ve'shakil ve'ila la. So Rav Yemar told Rav Asher, what about a case where someone makes a claim that this guy came over and he left with a silver cup, he stole it. He came over and he had a lunch here, and my silver cup is missing. And there's some testimony that he had something under his shirt, and the homeowner claims that it was stolen. So what about that? Can he just make a vow and then make the guy pay? And so the answer is, it depends. We see, is this homeowner a rich person who has silver cups? Does it make sense that he would have had silver cups in his house? Or even if he's not so rich himself, is he someone who is trustworthy and other people would give him expensive items like a silver cup to watch? So either belong to him or maybe belong to someone else. If the circumstances are such that it makes sense that he has a silver cup in his home, it's not, most people didn't have a silver cup, but if he does, then we trust him that he did have a silver cup, and then yes, fits into this situation, and he can make a vow and make this guy who came into his house pay. But if he's not so rich and not so trustworthy, then we don't really believe that he had a silver cup in the house in the first place, and therefore we won't believe him to collect a silver cup claim even with an oath. Nechbal kesad. Now we go to the next part of the Mishnah that says, if someone goes into someone else's house, when he goes in, he's perfectly healthy. He comes out with black and blues and broken bones, and he makes a claim. The homeowner here, he beat me up while I was in his house, and he has to pay. In that case, there's no witnesses that saw the guy actually beat him up, so we don't know what happened in the house. Maybe it was something else. But the injured party can make a vow and collect. אמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל לא שנו אלא מקום שיכול לחבל בעצמו אבל מקום שאינו יכול לחבל בעצמו נוטל שלא בשבועה. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shemuel that we only require that the injured party make a vow if it's a situation where he could have injured himself in this house. It's a big house with maybe there's construction going on, and it could be he banged into things, it's with dangerous things around, and maybe he got maybe these injuries are his own fault and that wasn't caused by the homeowner hitting him. In that case, since it's possible that he got the injury in some other way, he has to make a vow that in fact it was this guy that caused him the injury, and then he can collect. However, if it's an area, a place where it's impossible that he would have harmed himself in that way, let's say it's just a little house and everything's in order and there's nothing that is so hard and sharp that he would bang into and that would cause such injury, then he does not need to make a vow. He can just collect the money without a vow, because what else? He went into a house. There's only nobody else there. There's just this guy. There's no other way he could have gotten the injury. So it's evident that he got the injury from that person, and he can collect even without making a vow. Gemara asks, wait, how do you know that the other guy did it? Maybe he banged into a wall or scraped himself against a wall, and the wall did it. Every house has a wall. There's always things to bang into. Taneh Rabbi Chia shalta lo neshicha begabo uben asilei yadav. Rabbi Chia explains that we're talking about a case where he has a bite on his back or on his elbow, and something that could not have been inflicted on his own. If it's he banged his nose, then it could be he walked into a glass door or something. So then, yes, that's something that could have happened on its own. But if it's some kind of scratch on the back or elbow, so that would be impossible for him to get unless someone else injured him, and therefore that would be a case where he would collect without making a vow. Wait, how do you know it was this guy? Maybe it was somebody else that actually caused it. And so explain, no, it's talking about a case where there's nobody else home. This is the only person. It's an injury that he could not have gotten on his own, and in that case, he does not have to make a vow. He can simply collect because there's no other way he could have gotten the injury. But if there is some other way he could have gotten the injury, then he will have to make a vow. But once he makes the vow, the injured party can collect. The next item on the Mishnah is where the rabbis impose a vow on an opposite party of the person that should make the vow, because the person that really should make the vow is disqualified because he was found to be a liar beforehand. So for example, a defendant is, let's say, modeh b'miksat. And so he has to make a vow in order not to have to pay. That's a deoraita vow. But let's say that very defendant lied one time under oath, and since then, now he's not trustworthy to make a vow. Now he can't make a vow, so what do we do instead? The rabbis say we'll transfer the vow from him to the plaintiff, and the plaintiff can make a vow and use that to collect. So that's Keshenegdo, Chashud, Vafilu Shevuot Shav. Now, how does someone become disqualified from making a vow and untrustworthy? The Mishnah gave a couple of examples, and it said someone who made a false oath regarding Shevuot HaEdut or Shevuot HaPikadon. So those are examples of a false oath that would harm someone, would cause someone to lose money. And so he's not going to be trustworthy for sure regarding the next vow that would cause someone also to lose money. But then the Mishnah says, Afilu Shevuot Shav, even if he lied about a vain oath. Even then, he is considered not trustworthy to make a vow, and we would transfer the vow to the other party. So what does that mean, afilu Shevuot Shav? Why not just also Shevuot Shav? Why is Shevuot Shav a bigger chidush than the others? And the answer is, Lami baya kamar, Lami baya hanachti itbehu kefirat mamon, el afilu hane nameh. We're talking about not only this, but even that. Not only in a case where this person made a vow that denies a monetary claim, it's going to cause someone a monetary loss. He made a vow like that in the past, so for sure we're not going to trust him about the current vow. But not only that, even if he just denies something, he says that the sky is green. So this is just a nonsense, wrong vow, and it didn't hurt anybody. It didn't cause anybody a financial loss. So you might think that, well, then he could be trustworthy. No, he's not trustworthy. He's still willing to lie and a vow. So it means he doesn't care about vows very much. He's not scared of them, and so he is. That person also is not trustworthy. That's why it says even him. Now we ask, why doesn't it also include Shevuot Bitui? Like someone who says, I'm not going to eat tomorrow, and then he eats tomorrow. Ki katani shevuah techi kamishtaba b'shikra kamishtaba. Avar Shevuot Bitui deika lememar debekushta kamishtaba lakatane. And the answer is, we only put in the Mishnah a vow where at the time that you make the vow, it's already a lie. So that would be true if it's any of the other examples, like Shevuot HaEdut, right? He says that, I don't know any testimony about this, but he actually does know testimony. So at the very moment that he makes the vow, he is lying. Or if he says the sky is green, right at the very point that he makes the vow, it is a lie. However, Shevuot Bitui, that of an utterance, where he's making a vow about the future. Tomorrow I'm going to eat. So right now, it still could be true. So at the time that he makes the vow, it's not yet a lie until we see what his actions prove it to be the next day. But that, at the time that he made the vow, maybe he really had every intention to keep the vow. So if for some reason the next day something happened, but that doesn't mean that he's not trustworthy to make a vow. Could be that he does take vows seriously at the time that he makes them. So that person would still be reliable, and he would not be disqualified for making a vow. And in such a case, just because he made a vow about the future one time, that will not make him disqualified, himself making a vow of whatever modeh b'miksat or whatever else is imposed upon him. Tenach ochal velo ochal, achalti velo achalti ma'ika lememad. Okay, that makes sense for the type of Shevuot Bitui that has to do with the future, if he says, I will eat or I will not eat. But there's another type of Shevuot Bitui that's about the past. I ate or I didn't eat yesterday, and that is false at the time that he makes it. So that should disqualify the person, but yet it's not listed in the Mishnah. And so we answer that, indeed, it should be Tena Shevuot Shav V'chol Dedam Eleh. When the Mishnah says Shevuot Shav, it doesn't mean technically only a Shevuot Shav, like saying the sky is green. It means other Shevuot that are like it, including a Shevuot Bitui about the past. It's anything that's similar to it in that at the time that you make the oath, at that point it's already false. Then all those would disqualify someone from making an oath in the future, and in those cases the rabbis would transfer the oath to the other party. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.